everyone, welcome to Good Afternoon Norco. Today we'll be discussing the subject of language, gender, and culture. Our first guest is an author of several books, including Your Average, Performing Race, Literacy, and Masculinity. Please give a warm welcome to our first guest, Dr. Vershawn Ashanti Young. An American professor, do you feel like you connect more or less with the Black community?
Well, there is a language barrier between me and my culture, my Black peers. I appear to speak standard English, which separates me into the category of more queer, more white associated, and just really hard to identify with my Black peers. In addition to that, I am not seen as masculine because I do not talk with the same spicy lingo that my peers have, and I do not walk with that swag, and so I can be associated with being gay or being just more feminine than the average Black male, and it is very, very difficult to identify with them on all levels.
Alright, well, thank you very much for staying with us. So our second guest is the author of the famous book, You Just Don't Understand, Men and Women in Conversation. Please give a warm welcome to our second guest, Deborah Tannen.
Hi!
It's so nice to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Deborah, in case our viewers don't know, how do you feel about men and women in conversation?
Well, I feel that women in conversation tend to be a little more indirect, and this is because back a few years ago, not actually that long ago, women were not able to speak directly to their husbands telling them what they wanted. In fact, it was rude for women to speak like that. So we just kind of adapted to having to speak that way, whereas men, they are more direct because they never had to have that problem depending on, talking to their wife, their friends, their sons. They could talk however they wanted.
So while we're on the topic of indirectness, do you feel that when a woman's indirect, it's because every woman's indirect, or it just kind of depends on the woman?
I actually feel that it's part of the culture as well as the woman, because I wrote about my findings in Japan, and it turns out that women in Japan are actually much more direct and men are the ones who are indirect. And the indirect men have a much higher, much more noble standing, if you will. And the women who are direct are just seen as normal women, whereas here it's the men who are direct have that much more powerful standing, and women who are indirect are just women.
Well, that was very interesting. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's no problem.
Now, unfortunately for our third guest, he couldn't be with us today. However, we'll soon be video chatting with him, so stick with us after the break and you'll find out what happens. So our third and final guest is David Brooks. David is a well-known journalist from the New York Times. Now, please welcome him over Skype. It's so great to have you here, David.
Thank you very much for having me, Ashley.
So just based off your article, what do you feel is wrong with our education system and the consequences it has on children who don't fit in the ideal of the perfect student?
I feel like schools should accept students for who they are, instead of trying to change them into people and students that more fit people like Hamlet, who can reflect on everyday life and sit there and think. Students are more rambunctious, and they need to be taught in a physical way that they can understand and that they can relate with, or else they're not going to be able to comprehend the information that's provided to them.
So David, how do you feel that our schools should approach children? How should they engage them?
Well, it really starts with the teachers. Schools need to engage people as they are. We need leaders who insist on cultural diversities and teachers that can celebrate cooperation in competition, and we need to be able to figure out what makes a kid think and what makes a kid happy and try and integrate that into lessons so that the student can understand more, will be more inclined to listen and remember. A lot of schools are trying to make students fit into this cookie cutter type of student where they're able to be creative but also intellectual and have to sit there, and if they're not that type of student, then we label them as a problem child, or there's something wrong with them. We tell the parents, oh, they had another day as it was before, and suggest that they go on medication, but this is wrong. We need to embrace students as they are and try to work around that.
Alright, thank you so much for talking with us over Skype, David. It means a lot.
No problem. Anytime.
Well, that's all the time we had today. We'll see you tomorrow.